True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
So on December 16th, 2004, Becky Harper made a call to 911. It was just after checking in on her 23-year-old daughter, Bobbie Jo. So Bobbie Jo, who was 8 months pregnant, was lying on the floor in her home and something was horribly wrong. Paramedics raced to the scene where they found Bobbie Jo dead with devastating injuries to her abdomen. So Bobbie Jo had been brutally killed and her unborn baby was missing. In today's episode, A Life for a Life, we'll discuss this case as well as a couple of similar cases and the phenomenon of fetal abductions. Investigators found no signs of forced entry into Bobbie Jo's home, which suggested that she may have known her killer. An Amber Alert was put out for the baby as detectives canvassed the neighborhood. They did find one witness who reported seeing an unfamiliar car parked out front. Investigators would learn that Bobbie Jo's murder was premeditated, and the motive was the abduction of Bobbie Jo's baby. So efforts to find the baby and solve this murder would lead investigators to a very twisted plot and a predator who many people wouldn't have expected.
So today's beer is the Sixth Glass Quadruple Ale, brewed by Boulevard Brewing Company in Kansas City. This is a quad. It's a 10.2% alcohol by volume. These are pretty hefty beers, very filling. It's a dark amber color, thick, sticky tan head, has a nice aroma, kind of dark fruit, bread, molasses. Tastes like a little bit like raisin bread molasses, a little spice late, very full-bodied, and alcohol's hidden pretty well. So be careful with this one.
Okay, well, take it easy. Why don't you open it up for us?
Okay.
Okay, Dickie, so this happened right before Christmas in 2004, which makes it even sadder in my opinion.
Well, it's a time of year when you're not supposed to have stuff like this happen, right?
Well, yeah, it just seems to make it more poignant. I mean, anything sad at the holidays, it just seems worse.
It does. So it was 9 days before Christmas, as you said, 2004, and the young mother-to-be, Bobbie Jo, was at the most awkward stage of her pregnancy. Easily set off balance. She had to hold on to a piece of furniture or lean against the wall whenever she bent down to pick something up. Now, neighbor Chris Law had planned to walk over and check in on Bobbie Jo that afternoon. He wanted to ask her about her recent prenatal test results and see if she needed anything. But he hesitated when he started to go over because he saw a dirty pinkish-red car parked in front of her house, kind of pointing the wrong way. She already had company, so he decided he would catch up with his young neighbor later. He got into his car to run a few errands.
Yeah, and he would regret that, of course. But once Chris had left the neighborhood, no one was watching Bobbie Jo's house anymore. She was alone with her visitor. So the rat terriers that she loved and that she bred for a small profit were put in their room, and when Bobbie Jo's front door swung open, there was no one around to see the peculiar woman with dirty blonde hair walk across the front porch and to that unfamiliar vehicle. No one was around to question her about the blanketed bundle that she was holding in her arms either. No one heard the cry of a newborn infant as the woman drove the car away, and she made a U-turn at the dead end to head for somewhere that was totally unknown. So a brief time later, Becky Harper turned onto the street, and she turned around at the dead end and pulled in front of her daughter Bobbie Jo's home. So it was 3:30 in the afternoon. But her first hint that something was wrong was that the front door was ajar. So just a hint of worry crossed her mind. You know that feeling you get when,
Yeah, that little tingle.
Yeah, something just isn't quite right here. And of course it's worse when it's someone who's that pregnant. You worry, right?
Right.
Yeah, and it was December in northwest Missouri, so it was quite cold. Even the sunny days could be bitterly cold. So Becky pushed the door all the way open and called out her daughter's name. But she got no response, and this was strange. It was a very tiny house. So had Bobbie Jo fallen or hurt herself? Had she gone into early labor? Was she too sick to answer? Becky hesitated as she stepped inside, but she didn't see anything alarming. The living room was neat. It was orderly as usual. She moved to the dining room and then the kitchen, and everything seemed to be in its place. Even this late in her pregnancy, Bobbie Jo really kept her modest home tidy and inviting. So Becky called out to her daughter again, and she heard some barks from Bobbie Jo's dogs. Past the kitchen, the dogs were confined in the small bedroom that Bobbie Jo kept for them. So barks and whimpers were coming from the kennels, and as she reached the doorway to that room, a horrific sight struck her and just stopped her dead in her tracks. There was blood, so much blood, more blood than she had ever seen except maybe in a horror film. Red smears and clots covered the floorboards. It was like red, thick mud everywhere. Then she saw the really horrible part, her daughter, Bobbie Jo, on the floor. But she told herself, well, all that blood must have come from the dogs or something. Bobbie Jo would be heartbroken that something happened to her dogs, but she would be okay. But within seconds, Becky had no choice but to actually know that it was her daughter on the floor in a huge puddle of blood. Splotches of blood covered Bobbie Jo's face. Streaks marked her arms. Her belly, which had been round and full from pregnancy, was splayed open. Some of her internal organs protruded and hung onto the floor. So the scene just wouldn't add up in Becky's mind. It made no sense, and she was just struggling to take in what the hell had happened here. So once she called 911, she really wasn't able to think through, and she just said, my daughter's intestines exploded, because that's what it looked like to her. She didn't know how else to describe what she was seeing.
Well, I think that's a pretty good description.
Yeah, actually, I guess it is.
Her daughter had been eviscerated.
Yeah.
So.
Just horrible. Horrible.
Can't imagine.
No. So the operator asked her if she was still breathing. Becky kneeled in the blood beside Bobbie Jo and struggled just to keep it together. She followed instructions as the 911 operator talked her step by step through CPR. So she tilted back Bobbie Jo's head and pinched her nose, covering her daughter's mouth with her own and giving breaths. Then she sat up and put her hands on Bobbie Jo's chest to do compressions. So she did this over and over as she was instructed, just trying to ignore how futile her efforts seemed. So she cried, but she didn't stop. County Sheriff Ben Espy was the first responder on that scene, and Becky turned to him and begged him for his help. Please save her daughter. He saw no signs of life in the body of the young woman on the floor, but he worked on resuscitating her with Becky while the distressed dogs whimpered and barked. Becky had no idea that she was walking into a nightmare as she drove to the white bungalow with flaking paint that Bobbie Jo and her husband Zeb Stinnett called home. They were such a cute couple, friendly but quiet and just full of dreams for their future family. So the couple were only in their early 20s and their marriage was less than 2 years old. Their first child was due on January 19th, so in about a month. They'd saved every penny they could to build a nest egg to make it possible to own their own home. They really wanted a life for their baby that would exceed the expectations that they'd had for their own lives. So this was truly a tragedy.
Yeah, I can't imagine what chaos was going on in that house. This dead body on the floor, her mother in really bad shape, the policeman trying to see if he can do anything. And then you got these little rat terriers yapping around, going nuts, I'm sure.
Yes, I'm sure they were. I mean, they can sense when something's wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
So on the east end of Elm Street, neighbor Carla Wetzel heard the sirens. She could not see where the vehicle stopped, but it was just past the time school let out, and she worried that a school bus had been in an accident. Across the street from the Stinnett's home, another family stopped what they were doing as the ambulance pulled into their street. So 5 minutes after Sheriff Espy's arrival, the paramedics jumped out of the ambulance and into the house, where they relieved Becky and the sheriff. Emergency medical workers checked for vital signs and found no signs of life. Still, they attempted to revive Bobbie Jo, continuing CPR, failing to get a response because it was way too late. The sheriff told the paramedics that Bobbie Jo was 8 months pregnant. Then he listened in disbelief as one of the EMTs pointed to the cut umbilical cord and said, "This lady's been murdered because someone came to take the baby out of her body."
Well, that was shocking.
Yeah.
And Becky couldn't even imagine that someone would kill her daughter and steal her baby. She'd really never heard of such a thing.
Well, fortunately, it's not that common.
Right. So all the worries she had for her daughter and her daughter's health and the baby, this was something that would never have occurred to her.
I doubt that it would occur to anybody.
Yeah, true. In the kitchen, a devastated Becky Harper made her way to the sink and turned on the water. She stuck her bloody hands under the faucet and tried to wash away the blood. Bobbie Jo was pronounced dead at St. Francis Hospital and Health Services. So, the woman who had killed Bobbie Jo drove past farmhouses and barns across miles of countryside. Before she reached St. Joseph, Missouri, she took Interstate 29 south. She crossed the Missouri River and got into Kansas. Then she turned west on Interstate 7 towards Topeka. In the seat beside her, Bobbie Jo's baby cried and slept. This wasn't the puppy that she had told Bobbie Jo she'd come there for. As she made the 2.5-hour drive from Skidmore, Missouri to Topeka, Kansas, what was she thinking? It's hard to imagine. Was she trying to convince herself that this really was her baby? Did she convince herself of the story that she would later tell her mother? That she found the baby on the floor, picked her up and ran away from violence that had been committed by an unknown perpetrator. She would have time to plot and plan her actions and to help herself get away with this murder and keep the baby. But we have no way of knowing how deluded she was. Still, we know that she was manipulative enough to hide her actions and to lie to everyone. It was 5:15 when she called her husband from the parking lot of a Long John Silver's. She told him that she'd gone to Topeka to do some shopping that day, but she'd gone into labor while running errands. She said she'd rushed to the Birth and Women's Center where their healthy daughter was born. Her husband believed his wife when she told him she was pregnant, and he believed her now when she told him she had the baby. He thought he was the father of a newborn baby girl. In his first marriage, he'd had 3 boys, so this baby was his first daughter, and he was really thrilled. He called 2 of his wife's older children, a 9th grader and a senior in high school, and he told them the good news from their mother. So all 3 of them jumped into his pickup and drove north. The woman sat in her car with the baby, awaiting the family's arrival at the Long John Silver's. Then she picked up her cell phone and she called the minister at the church where she and her husband had been married. This was another planned step in her big lie. So for her, the more people who thought she had given birth, the more she would believe it herself. She told the minister about the labor that had taken her by surprise, and that as soon as her husband got to Topeka, she and the baby would be coming home. She also promised that she would bring her new baby daughter by to see him very soon. So this was planned out, and she's trying to cover her tracks as quickly as she can, but it's hard to know. Was she trying to convince herself? It kind of seems that way.
Yeah, I think she's going to just go to the end point and say, well, I've got my baby, and I'm not going to dwell on how I got the baby.
I mean, it's hard to be inside her mind because, of course, this was a disturbed person.
Quite a bit.
Yes.
We'll hear more about that later.
We'll hear a lot about that.
So her husband pulled into the parking lot. He's all smiles and tearful. He's just really overwhelmed that he's got a little girl. He and the teens hopped out of the truck. He rushed over to his wife and helped her and the baby get into the cab of his pickup. The 2 older kids got into their mother's car, and the high school senior drove it, following her father's pickup down State Route 31 to their home in Milvern, Kansas.
So I just can't go on with the story without saying something about the naivete of the husband. Any comments from you?
Well, yeah.
I mean, we don't know the background yet, but just the fact that she would be waiting in a car.
Well,
Why? Why wasn't she in a hospital?
I got to figure that this guy is relatively unsophisticated and not real knowledgeable about things. If you think about it, you deliver a baby at 36 weeks, you're probably not going to go home within hours of birth.
I think giving birth to a baby at any stage of your pregnancy, you're going to be in the hospital at least for a day, at least long enough for your husband to pick you up.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah?
But he doesn't think about that. And how has he lived with this lady for 8 months of pregnancy and not be skeptical?
I know.
How do you put that over?
How did he believe that first? Yes. And he isn't like this young guy with no life experience. He's had 3 children with his previous wife.
He had.
Yeah. So back at home, the high school senior used her cell phone to take some photos of her mother and the baby, who she really believed was her half-sister. Then the husband used a camcorder to record the homecoming on videotape. When that initial excitement kind of died down, the woman prepared a makeshift bed for the baby and settled her in for the night. She then sat down at her computer and she emailed the youngest of her 3 daughters who now lived with a family friend in Alabama. So none of her other children lived with her. So to the email announcing the birth, she attached a photo of the new baby, who she named Abigail.
Before the first hour of the investigation was complete, investigators had confirmed that Zeb Stinnett was not responsible for his wife's death. He had not left his job at Kawasaki Motors in Maryville that afternoon. That he was briefly a suspect probably didn't even cross Zeb's mind. His wife was dead, and his baby was missing. In Skidmore, speculation was running wild. People prayed that the newborn baby survived and would be found. Cheryl Houston, Becky Harper's close friend from high school, left her job at Walmart at the end of her shift, and one of the door greeters stopped her to tell her about the horrible news. When she drove past Elm Street, official vehicles flashing lights and yellow crime scene tape marked Bobbie Jo's house. She never knew a mother and daughter with a closer relationship than the one between Becky and Bobbie Jo, and she just felt terrible for Becky.
Yeah, the word spread to the local media, and they came to the crime scene. An hour and a half into the investigation, the sheriff contacted the state headquarters of the Amber Alert system in Jefferson City. So they asked for hair color, eye color, skin complexion, size, and weight of the abduction victim, but SB had no answers for that. So officials insisted there was nothing they could do. An Amber Alert had to meet specific criteria, and this case didn't meet the standards. But with some work and contacting the right people, they would eventually get the Amber Alert out. At the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children outside of Washington, D.C., news of this abduction reached the desk of Kathy Nahirny, and she pulled information from similar cases and gathered contact information for the investigators who'd handled the most recent cesarean abduction in Oklahoma that had happened 1 year earlier. So they wanted investigators to know the profile of this kind of an offender and to realize that they were not looking for a typical criminal. They wanted them to be able to use the knowledge of experienced law enforcement agencies and not to waste time following up on leads that were unproductive, because we don't even know if the baby's alive or in good health. So the sheriff went to the hospital and talked to the medical staff, who assured him that the baby was probably still alive.
I don't know if they're just trying to placate the sheriff or what.
Yeah.
That's a very tough assumption to make.
Yeah, I guess, though, would she take the baby if the baby died?
She might not even know. She's going to get the baby out and get away quickly.
Well, I guess. But they did tell him that if the infant was premature, she may have suffered traumas during the assault, and that would include a possible lack of oxygen. So they knew they needed the help of the public to get this baby home. Every moment that passed gave the murderer, abductor, time to get further and further from the crime scene, far enough to hide the baby's identity and separate the infant from its family for possibly its whole life. So Missouri State Highway Patrol vehicles from that region gathered in the area around Skidmore. And those officers, the sheriff and his deputies, put together an extensive search for a newborn. So they looked in every dumpster, on roadsides, checking out any trash that would be large enough for a newborn. At every bridge, they examined the creek beds and water for anything that could have been a baby thrown over the side, horrific as that sounds. They also kept an eye on the passing traffic for any vehicle matching the description of the car that had been seen by one neighbor in front of the Stinnett home. So the police went door to door canvassing a 4-block radius of the Stinnett home. At the house, neither the jambs nor the lock showed any signs of forced entry. In the living room, not one single thing looked out of place. There was a computer that would be taken and examined for any information that might show some communications from or to the killer. The kitchen was where the first signs of violence could be seen, and someone had attempted to clean up in the blood-spattered sink. Off to the left of the dining room was a bedroom, where evidence of a struggle was all over the floor. Knowing that the person who died there was a young pregnant woman was really shocking and just hard to even comprehend. Crime scene experts came to recover prints, take all stray fibers, and any microscopic evidence that they could find. The blood on the floor was examined, photographed, and analyzed. Samples were taken to determine if all of it was the victim's blood, or if maybe it included blood from the killer or from the baby. Since no one with ownership of the computer, which would just be Bobbie Jo or Zeb, were considered suspects, law enforcement could move forward without any legal complications, and they could retrieve any data to help solve this case. So they're right on it right away.
They did very well. Very quick work. Now, at first, it appeared to be just a normal household personal computer with little internet activity. But when they looked at the chat room use, a clue came from the casual back-and-forth conversations. There is mention of a woman north of Fairfax, Missouri, who was supposed to meet that day with Bobbie Jo.
And this was kind of their first lead.
Yes, it was.
If she was supposed to meet with her that day, could be something, maybe not, but definitely could be something.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's the day the murder occurred.
Yes.
So an internet conversation between happyhavenfarms@hotmail.com, exgringo@hotmail.com, and fisherforkids@hotmail.com popped up. The Happy Haven Farms address belonged to Bobbie Jo Stinnett. The Fisher for Kids address belonged to a woman identified as Darlene Fisher. Fisher talked about her 4 kids, her need to get out of the chat room and into the kitchen to make supper for her children. She chatted about her plans to drop by the Stinnett house the next day to see Bobbie Jo's puppies, which, as she said, is December 16th, the day of the murder. At first, she just seemed to be a woman who planned to come to Bobbie Jo's home on the same day that she was murdered, and may have seen something relevant during her visit. Or she may have seen the perpetrator without knowing it. Or she was the perpetrator.
Yeah, of course. So Sheriff Espy and every available highway patrol officer in the area headed to Fairfax. But no matter how hard they searched, they could find no record of Darlene Fisher in the area. No phone number, no address, really no indication that she'd ever lived anywhere near that town. But they persevered and they asked all around. Still, the name did not sound familiar to anyone they spoke with, not to law enforcement or to the public. So they moved out from the town center until almost midnight, when they thought they may have caught a break. Highway Patrol noticed a car going at a high speed in Atchison County, just 22 miles from Skidmore, and it matched the description of the vehicle seen in front of the Stinnett house earlier that afternoon. So they drove through the night at dangerous speeds. The police were afraid that their target would lose control of the car and wreck it, but when at last law enforcement succeeded in stopping the driver, there was no baby. It was just a reckless driver. So discouraged and, disappointed, they ticketed him and went back to their search. At 12:30 a.m. on December 17th, the Amber Alert did go out from coast to coast. The statement asked people to look out for and report any abandoned or discarded bloody clothing or towels. It also warned that the infant could have health issues and would have a freshly cut umbilical cord. So the release of this information nationwide would really have people searching everywhere.
Out in the mobile command post on Elm Street in Skidmore, the computer expert finished his preliminary review of the Stinnett's computer without finding any additional information to help in the search for Darlene Fisher. He needed an IP address before he could learn more about it. Around 2 a.m., he packed up the computer and his equipment and took it all to his office at St. Joseph's Police Department. Detectives were convinced that Darlene Fisher was a fake name, because they'd been searching for hours. Nobody knew about Darlene Fisher. It was up to the computer forensic specialist to find the true identity of Darlene Fisher. Sheriff Espy was happy about the news coverage reporters provided on the Amber Alert for Bobbie Jo's baby. He certainly did not want the media to get in the way of the crime scene, but he did want to keep them as an ally. But with a murder this fresh and a child still missing, it was hard to know what information needed to be withheld to solve the crime and what needed to be released to find the baby.
Yeah, there was one lead about 2 men, a woman, and a black market baby selling ring, which led the sheriff to announce that they were looking for these 3 persons of interest. They also told the media that they wanted to find a 1980s or 1990s red 2-door hatchback, quite possibly a Honda. They called a news conference late Friday morning, that's the next morning, and now that they thought they had a more promising lead, the sheriff stepped up to the microphone and explained that an autopsy was now underway in Jackson County. He said more than likely our victim was strangled and probably deceased when the baby was removed from her womb. The mother was 8 months pregnant, So we're looking at a 1-month premature baby that was removed with the umbilical cord cut. He said that the evidence shows that the baby was probably wrapped up and taken out of the home. They were looking for a red car that had been sitting in the driveway from at least 2:30 to 3, which was the time of the crime. So in response to their questions, he told them that neither the investigators nor the family knew of any possible suspects. Once they were able to get the IP address for Darlene Fisher, an FBI agent contacted Senior Security Specialist Melissa Irwin at Quest Communications, and she confirmed that her company hosted that address. So this was a huge break.
Very big break.
Yep. Performing a reverse domain name search, she was able to point to a Topeka, Kansas server. Now the investigators had a specific geographic area for the search. They determined that the user accessed a server through a dial-up connection. Remember those?
I remember.
Yeah. The telephone number making that call on the afternoon of December 15th originated from 32419 South Adams Road in Melbourne, Kansas. So the investigators centered in on Topeka, and they raced 30 miles southwest to Melbourne. So the investigators who were centered in Topeka raced 30 miles southwest to Melbourne, which is a tiny town with a population of just 400 people. But it's still a little bit bigger than Skidmore. So 6 FBI agents and Kansas law enforcement officials gathered around the farmhouse of Kevin and Lisa Montgomery. So when they arrived, no one was at home. Putting together Chris Law's description of the car he'd seen at the Stinnett home with information from the Kansas Vehicle Registration Database, they would know the Montgomerys were on their way home as soon as they spotted a dirty red Toyota Corolla. On the morning of December 17th, Kevin and Lisa Montgomery were kind of going about their business. They bundled up the baby, got in the car, and drove off. It was about 9:30 in the morning when Kevin, Lisa, and the baby that they named Abigail entered the Whistle Stop Cafe for breakfast. The Whistle Stop was in the middle of a block-long strip of buildings in downtown Melbourne.
In downtown.
Yeah, like the 2 streets.
Yeah.
Inside, the cafe was very small and cozy, and of course in a town that small, everybody knew each other. All of the tables were flanked by black metal chairs with maroon vinyl seats, so it kind of had that vintage cafe look. Kevin and Lisa rarely ate at this cafe, but Kevin's parents were well known among the regulars. So after the couple sat down at a small single table, and Lisa set the baby carrier on the floor by her feet, they ordered breakfast. This new baby drew a lot of attention. Everyone wanted to see her. One of the customers actually carried the baby from table to table, showing her off to the dozen or so people who were there, while Kevin and Lisa ate. So that just seems kind of crazy. I don't think I'd take a baby out one day after they're born, especially walk them around and show them off. But Lisa just didn't seem like protective of the baby. And you might wonder why.
But the owner of the Whistle Stop said, Lisa, you don't bring a newborn out in public.
Right.
Yeah, it's only a day old, Lisa said. But no, you don't bring a baby out 1 day old.
No, infection, what?
Infection, mostly.
Yeah. They really have to build up their immunity.
That's right.
Yep. So the owner also said, we didn't even know you were pregnant. Most people didn't. So Lisa turned her attention back to her breakfast, and despite the harsh words that she got from Kathy, she couldn't help noticing that Kathy enjoyed the baby. Kathy smiled down at the pretty little infant who was wearing a pink hat. There was an Amber Alert that Kathy heard on the news that morning, but this didn't even cross her mind at the time. Kevin's boss, Daryl Schultz, was there too. He hadn't turned on the TV yet that day and didn't know that the authorities had issued an alert. But for some reason, the presence of that baby did concern him. It's probably because he knew Lisa. The baby herself was one of the cutest he'd ever seen, but the timing of her arrival really made him feel uncomfortable. So he was at the cafe, and he walked over to the couple, and he said, where in the world did you get this baby? But Lisa explained her story.
That's straightforward, isn't it?
Yeah. She explained her story of the baby's birth, that she was out in Topeka shopping, and Daryl said, well, you didn't even look that close to delivery when I saw you a week ago. So he's not holding back.
No, he's not.
But Kevin said, well, the baby was small, and added that Lisa had never shown much during any of her pregnancies. So Daryl asked Kevin about the birth experience, and Kevin told him, well, I wasn't even there. I didn't know about the baby till I got home, and Lisa called me from Topeka. So red flags are flying.
Aren't they?
Yeah, because anyone with common sense just thinks this is strange, And if you knew Lisa and knew some of her history, you'd be suspicious.
Quite.
Yeah, but I guess she had Kevin just really fooled, even though Daryl knew something was just not right with that answer. Still, he complimented the couple on the baby and didn't say anything else. After they ate, the couple went up the street about 2 blocks down and around the corner to the parsonage of the First Church of God. That's where Kevin, Lisa, and Kevin's parents regularly worshipped. So they wanted Reverend Mike Wheatley and his wife to see the baby. When the Wheatleys opened the door, Kevin was smiling, and Lisa did look really tired, like someone who might have given birth the day before. But they did notice she was quieter than usual, and they were taken aback because for months they had not believed that Lisa really was pregnant. They had suspected that she was only claiming to be pregnant to get attention, but now they saw there was proof of her pregnancy. It did seem odd, though, that the Montgomerys were bringing the baby around to visit so soon. Lisa told them that she and Kevin selected Abigail as the name because they wanted a biblical name for their child. And Abigail was a reference to one of King David's wives in the Old Testament. So the Wheatleys listened politely, but they did notice a little scratch on the baby's cheek, as if she'd gouged herself with her tiny fingernail. Which, okay, fair enough, babies do that.
That can happen.
Yep, but they also saw a small bruise on the back of her hand.
Yeah, that probably shouldn't be there.
Yeah, well, neither of these little injuries seemed really, too strange to raise flags, but they couldn't understand why the infant's head was not misshapen, because Lisa said it was a vaginal birth just one day before, and this baby had a perfectly round head.
Well, most vaginal births have some degree of molding of the skull, but not all of them.
No, but usually.
Yeah, usually. You could say, all right, a 36-week infant who weighed what? She weighed 5 pounds?
Something over 5 pounds, yeah.
Yeah. So she could, and the mother's given birth before, so there might not be much, if any, molding.
Yeah, and I don't think the molding was that big of a deal. I think it's just all these little things adding up.
Yeah, if you look at them collectively.
Yes,
exactly. They would.
Because Lisa, she was strange, and we're going to get more into that.
She was very strange.
Yeah, the whole birth process that she explained didn't make any sense.
No.
Even if she did have her water break when she was shopping, she would have gone to have the baby at a birthing center, which she said she did. But why wouldn't she have her husband come and get her there? Why would she be at the Long John Silver's?
Well, I can't answer that.
Yeah, so that was really weird. So after visiting the minister, Kevin and Lisa drove down to Linden, Kansas, and they stopped by the county courthouse. So their first stop was the county appraiser's office, and that's where Lisa's weekend co-worker at Casey's General Store would work on the weekdays, and Lisa wanted to show off her baby to her. But her friend wasn't there. All the staff of that office had gone out for a celebratory Christmas meal together, so it was like their office Christmas party. So the only person behind the counter was an employee of the county clerk's office, who Lisa didn't really know very well. So Kevin, Lisa, and baby Abigail went down one door to the county clerk's office, where one door down from the county clerk's office, and they smiled as the staff there oohed and awed over the baby. Lisa again shared her story of the baby's birth, her surprise when her water broke, and the experience she had of driving herself while in labor to the birthing center. So it's just kind of weird that she's going around showing the baby off to everyone.
Sure is.
It's weird if it actually was her baby, but it's also weird as someone who abducted this baby and committed a murder.
Yeah, and she already has people figuring she was faking a pregnancy or they had doubts.
Absolutely.
So why are you drawing attention to yourself?
Well, that's what I thought when I first read about it, and then I thought, well, it seems like she had this idea that the more people who accept her story, the truer her story is. You know how if a lie gets enough acknowledgement, then someone who's a pathological liar like that can convince themselves of the lie.
Right.
So I think it was something like that going on.
So the next stop for the couple was to Lisa's ex-husband, Carl Bowman, and his new wife, Vanessa. They went to their house. And pretty much defiantly, Lisa showed the baby to the father of her other 4 children. Carl did not know what to say. Vanessa pulled Kevin aside and said, "Is this really your baby? Are you sure Lisa didn't buy it somewhere or steal it from someone?" Kevin looked at Vanessa as if she was nuts. He told Lisa it was time to leave.
Well, you would. If you bring your baby to visit someone and they say that, you'd say, "Are you insane?"
Yeah.
Why would you say that? I mean, it is insulting at the very least. It's crazy that someone would say that to you about your child.
Yeah, well, bitter divorce. The new wife doesn't like the former wife.
Well, yeah, and there's good reason.
Yes, there is.
So Lisa and Kevin then headed back to their home in Malvern. Although Lisa's mother, Judy, lived on a farm in the outskirts of Linden, they did not take the baby there for a visit. So big issues with her mom. Unaware of Lisa's new baby and unaware of the Amber Alert, Judy was very surprised when she got a call from one of her friends who worked at the courthouse. The woman congratulated her on being a grandmother again. And being well aware of her daughter's history, Judy said, "Yeah, right. She either stole it or she bought it." So, wow. A lot going on behind the scenes here, right?
It looks like anybody who knew Lisa when she was younger knew what the difficulties were.
Yeah.
Or suspected.
Well, yeah, it's just everybody's got this weird perception of her.
Yeah. Well, why don't you go over Lisa's history?
Okay. Yeah, because it's fascinating. So it is shocking that her mother's first comment about the baby was that she had stolen it. But like I said, her childhood had been a real horror show. So Lisa had been sexually and physically abused by her stepfather for years. And her mother and father divorced when she was 16. And apparently her mother blamed Lisa for the divorce. Her mother would deny it, but Lisa and Judy had a very tumultuous relationship then. And we'll get more into her childhood when we talk about the trial. So Lisa married Carl Bowman, who was her stepbrother, when she was 18 years old. So there's something weird.
Number one. Number two, she had her first child 5 months later.
So she'd gotten pregnant by her stepbrother, and they'd probably been told they have to get married.
Yeah.
But she would have 3 more children over the next 3 years.
So she was pregnant most of the time, over 3 years.
Yep. And I think when you're in a situation like that, I think self-esteem or self-worth can just be based on producing babies, which is very sad. But in 1990, she had a tubal ligation. She would claim that Carl and her mother forced her to have the surgery. In the years following this surgery, Lisa would claim to be pregnant 4 more times. In 1994, while separated from Carl, she had an affair and she claimed to be pregnant from that. Then she and Carl got back together and she just kind of dropped it, didn't talk about being pregnant anymore. So I don't know if that's something she used to get back with him. I'm not certain about all the details of that. But as soon as she's back with Carl, she's just not pregnant anymore.
Yeah.
But they divorced in 1998. In the year 2000, before Lisa and Kevin were married, she told him that she was pregnant and she planned to have an abortion. So Kevin gave her $40 and she never mentioned that pregnancy again. So did Kevin think you could have an abortion for $40? I don't know. He's a simple man.
Yeah, I think they probably cost more than $40, though.
I think so, yes.
Even in 2000.
Yes, absolutely. In 2002, Lisa told her friends and family that she was pregnant again. And although she said she was getting prenatal care, she wouldn't allow Kevin to come to any of her appointments. Remember, she'd had a tubal. She'd been sterilized.
Pretty much difficult getting pregnant.
Yes. When the due date came and went, Lisa told Kevin that the baby had died and that she donated the body to science. And again, Kevin had let that slide. He didn't ask for any proof of that. He didn't think it was weird that he hadn't been involved. It's very weird. But that didn't stop her because then in 2004, Lisa claimed to be pregnant again, and she was due in December. And this is what led to the tragedy of Bobbie Jo Stinnett being murdered.
Now, throughout 2004, Lisa was in a custody dispute with Carl. He knew that she was unable to become pregnant and that she was claiming to be pregnant. He and his wife sent emails to Lisa telling her that they would expose her lie and use it against her in the custody hearing. She told them that she would prove them wrong.
Ooh, that sounds very ominous,
Prophetic words, huh?
Yeah. So Lisa Montgomery met Bobbie Jo Stinnett at a dog show in April of 2004. Both of them were involved in the breeding of rat terriers, so they were familiar with one another online from message boards on the terriers. Bobbie Jo had a website with pictures of her and her dogs promoting Happy Haven Farms, which was her dog breeding business that she ran in her home in Skidmore. After Bobbie Jo became pregnant in the spring of 2004, she shared the news with her online friends, and this included Lisa Montgomery. It was around the time of Bobbie Jo's pregnancy announcement when Lisa began to tell her friends and family that she was pregnant. She began to wear maternity clothes and began acting like she was pregnant. Her husband, Kevin, apparently didn't know about the tubal ligation, so he believed her. Some people who knew her believed her, but many did not. Using the alias Darlene Fisher, Lisa contacted Bobbie Jo on December 15th by instant message. Bobbie Jo had a litter of puppies for sale, and Lisa said she was interested in buying one, so they agreed to meet the next day. Lisa still lived in Melbourne, Kansas, but she told Bobbie Jo that she lived in a town closer to Skidmore. That night, Bobbie Jo told her husband Zeb and her mother Becky that a woman from Fairfax was going to stop by to see the puppies.
December 16th, Lisa drove out to Skidmore, arriving at Bobbie Jo's house around 12:30 p.m. So they spent a fair amount of time together. Lisa had a sharp kitchen knife as well as a white cord in her coat pocket. They brought the puppies outside and played with them. Then at 2:30, Bobbie Jo got a phone call from her mother and told her that she would give her a ride home from work at 3:30.
So sometime after that phone call ended, Lisa attacked Bobbie Jo, strangling her until she was unconscious. Then she cut into her abdomen, and the pain caused Bobbie Jo to regain consciousness and struggle with Lisa. Lisa ended up strangling Bobbie Jo a second time, killing her. Then she cut out the fetus, cut the umbilical cord, and left with the baby. Becky Harper had called her daughter shortly after 3:30 p.m., and when no one answered, she'd walk the 2 blocks over to Bobbie Jo's house. That's when she discovered her daughter had been killed and her grandchild was missing.
You know how difficult it is to do a C-section?
I've seen lots of them.
Without training?
Yeah, but if you don't have to worry about the mother, makes it easier if you
Well, yes and no. I mean, I guess, she looked at YouTube.
Yeah, she watched some YouTube videos.
Yeah. So,
I'm just saying that if you don't care if the mother's okay and you don't have to worry about stitching them back up or anything.
Oh, yeah. Forget about that.
It's a lot more rudimentary.
Just the thing with the baby. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not like there's a lot of room in that uterus, so you start cutting into it. Mm-hmm. You got to be careful.
Yes.
That you don't do something to the baby.
Exactly, yeah.
And then when you cut the cord, if you just leave that hanging, it still will bleed a little bit.
Well, she'd had children, so she probably knew from that and the video that you have to close it off somehow.
Yeah.
Not sure if she tied it or pinched it.
Put a little tie or something on it.
Yeah. But of course,
and then you got to make
dangerous.
sure you do it at the right time. I mean, if you get a preterm baby, they'll die.
Yeah?
Or get sick.
Well, I don't think that Lisa Montgomery was thinking all this through, Dickie.
No, I know she wasn't.
No. So a little bit about Bobbie Jo. She was Becky's first child. She was born when Becky was in her early 20s. She was born in 1981, and she had a cleft palate. And then she had surgery to correct it when she was 2 years old. But she also had severe ear infections as a child and had a speech impediment. But over time, she was able to overcome it.
Yeah, both ear infections and a speech impediment will be seen commonly with cleft palates. Well, you got an opening in the palate, and you got kind of a direct route into the middle ear.
But Bobbie Jo was still a small child when her father left the family and he moved to Texas. Then the divorce of her parents was finalized in 1985. By the time Bobbie Jo was a teenager, her mom had remarried, and she had a half-brother who was born when she was 13. Bobbie Jo was a very shy child for most of her life. In the 5th and 6th grades, she was made fun of a lot because of her speech delay. But she went through a really dramatic change when she entered high school in Graham, Missouri. She joined the 4-H club. She became a cheerleader. She worked on the school newspaper and yearbook, and she excelled as an honor student. She loved riding horses, and her special love for animals was really a great asset for her when she did barrel racing. Then romance entered Bobbie Jo's life when she was very young. She and Zeb grew up in the same neighborhood, and they knew each other from when they were kids. In high school, their friendship grew into a serious relationship, and they became inseparable. So Zeb graduated and got a job at the Kawasaki plant, which was really the big employer in that town.
I can imagine.
Yeah. Bobbie Jo graduated in the spring of 2000, and in April 2001, Bobbie Jo got a job at Earl Made Feed and Supply. So for most of the year, it was a part-time position, but she worked full-time hours during the busy seasons, and she was an excellent employee. Her supervisor would say that she was dependable and flexible, and she was just one of those people who was always willing to fill in when another employee was out sick. So you know how some young people can be just kind of flippant about a job like that, but she took it quite seriously. She enjoyed gardening, and she made an effort to learn all about the store's products. But more than the gardening, she loved the animals, and that passion drew her into the pet department. So the owner, Chuck, gave her the responsibility of ordering the fish and the small animals for the store. She was quiet but very upbeat, but she was more of a caretaker than a salesperson. She often talked to Chuck and her coworkers about wanting to breed rat terriers. She just loved them. And soon she started Happy Haven Farms. She was very particular about who adopted her puppies, too. Each prospective owner had to fill out an application with details about the number and the ages of the people in the household. So in no time, Bobbie Jo earned the respect of many people in the rat terrier community, which I read that in a book. I didn't know there was a rat terrier community, but I guess that's what you call it. I guess there's a community for anything, any hobby.
A German Shepherd community.
Yeah.
There's a
quilting community, baking community,
stamp collecting community,
different breeds of cats. I mean, yeah, there's a community for everything.
But you didn't think that a rat terrier deserved a community?
Well, it sounds very specific is all. So in April 2003, Bobbie Jo resigned from her job at Earl May to accept a higher paying position at the Kawasaki plant where Zeb worked.
Yeah, so they worked together, kind of, or worked in the same business.
Right, it was more money. Then she married Zeb in April of 2003. So the newlyweds rented a small bungalow on Elm Street, and all the money that Bobbie Jo made from her rat terrier business was money that was put away because the couple was working to someday buy their own home. And Bobbie Jo became a regular at dog shows. She was a rat terrier breed inspector and a licensed judge for the National Kennel Club, which, you know, it's a small thing, but she's a very young person. It's an accomplishment.
Oh, I think that's amazing.
Yeah. Sometimes when she traveled to exhibitions, she shared a hotel room with a woman named Tracy Ramirez, a breeder she met online. Other times, Zeb went with her to the shows. He wasn't at all involved in the business, but he did encourage his wife's passion. So it was April 3rd, 2004, a couple of weeks before a dog show in Abilene, Kansas, when Lisa Montgomery wrote to Bobbie Jo Stinnett and told her that she would be at the show on April 17th with at least 2 of her puppies. Bobbie Jo responded that she would be at the show. At the show, Bobbie Jo was pregnant, and Lisa Montgomery, wearing maternity clothes, told everyone that she was having twins. She was not to be outdone. You're having 1 baby, I'm having 2.
Yep.
In the months after that show, Lisa and Bobbie Jo stayed in contact online, and they chatted mostly about puppies. They compared notes about the progress of their pregnancies, though, too, and shared dreams about their babies' futures. Another woman in the Rat Terrier chat group announced in April that she was pregnant with twins, and Lisa contacted her via instant messenger and wrote, "I've got you beat." And she added that her twins were due to arrive first on December 12th. A few days later, Lisa contacted that woman again, and she told her she was knitting a blanket for the woman's babies. The mother-to-be thought it was a little odd but nice that someone that she knew only online would go to that much trouble for her. But you have to wonder, when she said she was knitting a blanket for the woman's babies, was she planning on stealing those babies?
She might have had that in mind.
Because she said she was having twins.
Yep.
Yeah. But in June, the woman miscarried her twins when the fetuses were just 14 weeks old. And oddly enough, Lisa just cut her off and stopped chatting with her after that.
Yeah, so that makes you think that she was looking at this woman bearing twins as a prospective baby donor.
Yeah, or victim. Both, right?
Right. So that spring, Bobbie Jo fell in love with Fonzie, a puppy she saw online. He was a white and blue fawn male born on February 29, 2004, in Austin, Texas. Bobbie Jo contacted the kennel owner to discuss the possibility of joint ownership of Fonzie, and they made arrangements to meet at the dog show in Norman, Oklahoma. Rat terriers were a passion for her, and 2004 was a big year for Bobbie Jo's business. One of her dogs had a litter, and those puppies were in high demand. She hardly had time to announce it online before she had a waiting list for 5 of the pups.
Yeah, she was just so happy with the success of her rat terrier breeding.
Oh, yeah. You probably didn't expect it would ever be that good financially.
But her excitement over that really didn't compare to her excitement over the baby she had on the way. That she was just delirious with joy over that. Her due date was January 19th, and she and Zeb decided on Zebediah if the baby was a boy and Victoria Jo if it was a girl. As soon as Bobbie Jo knew that her baby would be a girl, she went down to the Walmart and registered. Her list included newborn onesies, pink and yellow blankets, and a diaper bag she had her eye on. She already planned to take Victoria Jo with her to dog shows right away. She wanted her to grow up comfortable with all the dogs and the shows and one day be part of her business.
Well, yeah.
So she had big plans for the future. But in early October, Lisa Montgomery posted at an online rat terrier site. She said, "I lost one of the twins. It's so terrible, but they were able to save one twin." So that makes me think she'd moved on from the woman who was carrying twins to Bobbie Jo. On another site, she complained about her child support from Carl Bowman and complained that her attorney also represented Kevin's ex-wife. Kevin was in court nearly every year for the child support he paid to be increased. Later that month, Kevin told Reverend Wheatley that he'd felt the baby kick inside of his wife's body. Wheatley was still skeptical. The rat terrier enthusiasts were excited when the very pregnant Bobbie Jo showed up at a dog show in mid-November. That same month, Bobbie Jo's friends got together to throw a baby shower for the young mother-to-be. And this was also the month that Lisa Montgomery purchased a home birth kit. So it was the type of thing that midwives sometimes use to do home deliveries.
I didn't know there was a home birth kit.
Yeah, I didn't really either, but it makes sense. You'd need supplies.
Yeah, you would.
On the internet, Lisa visited MapQuest and downloaded directions from her house to Melbourne to the home of Bobbie Jo Stinnett from her house in Melbourne to the home of Bobbie Jo Stinnett in Skidmore. Then she sat at her desk for a long time on November 17th, watching an online video of a doctor performing a cesarean section. Lisa quit her job at Wendy's on Interstate Highway 35 before that Thanksgiving. She told her employer that she needed to cut back on her workload because her baby was due in December. Then on December 10th, Lisa wrote on the Rat Terrier page about her difficulty in getting good photos of her dogs. She added that her due date was December 16th. That same day, in Osage County District Court, Lisa's first husband, Carl, filed for custody of 2 of the 4 children born during his marriage to Lisa. The oldest child, Desiree, would be 18 years old and could decide on her own. The youngest, 14-year-old Kayla, wanted to stay in Georgia with the family who had her. But the 2 middle children, CJ and Chelsea, 15 and 16, asked to live with their dad. They both said they had difficulties with their mother. And that should not surprise any of us.
No, it doesn't.
As part of his case, Carl planned to question Lisa's mental state by saying that she faked pregnancies, so this was known. Lisa would either have to admit that she was not pregnant, or Carl could prove it, and that would improve his chances of getting custody. That same night was Parents and Seniors Night at the high school basketball game in Melbourne. Although Lisa wore maternity clothes, the people who saw her that night thought it was really hard to believe that she was due in less than a week. After that game, Lisa went online and posted a message next to her internet name. She wrote, "Baby any day, maybe today."
Then on December 15th, Jason Dawson logged on to MSN Messenger. From her home computer, Lisa Montgomery joined him online. Now, Jason had no clue about the real identity of the person he was chatting with. He thought he was talking to Darlene Fisher, a woman who wanted to get a rat terrier puppy for her children for Christmas. She told him that she couldn't take the puppy home right away because she was going on vacation. She wanted to put a deposit down, though, before she left town. Now, Jason thought Darlene was a nice person. He was a parent, too, and wanted to help her in her puppy search. So he asked her where she lived. She told him she was in Fairfax, Missouri. Jason knew that town was just a half-hour's drive from Skidmore, and he thought of Bobbie Jo Stinnett. He knew Bobbie Jo had puppies for sale, so he gave Bobbie Jo's email address to Darlene, thinking he was doing Bobbie Jo a favor.
Yeah, and that would kind of haunt him later.
Well,
I mean, he was not at fault at all, but you know how you can feel guilty if you're any part of something so horrible.
Yeah.
Even if it wasn't your plan and you had no idea. So at 4:22 p.m., Lisa Montgomery, under the name Darlene Fisher, sent a note via instant messenger to Bobbie Jo. For 20 minutes, Bobbie Jo and Darlene chatted back and forth, and they made plans to meet at Bobbie Jo's house the next day. Early in the afternoon of December 16th, Deanne Hensley of Bedford, Iowa, was shopping at the Walmart in Maryville with her mother and her 6-month-old baby. Her baby started to cry while she was browsing through some CDs in the music department. And that's when Lisa Montgomery approached her with a big smile. "What a beautiful baby," she said. And Deanne thanked her for the compliment, then turned back to her child. But Lisa continued to hover nearby. Then she offered to hold the woman's baby for her while she shopped. And this just really creeped out Deanne. She got a bad feeling.
Oh, no kidding. I think anybody would.
Yeah. She held her baby tighter, and she looked at the stranger who wanted to hold her child. And behind Lisa's smile, she sensed some danger. She told herself that her suspicions were probably just her maternal instinct and she was being paranoid, but still she knew she didn't want that woman near her baby. So she smiled politely, nodded goodbye, and walked away from Lisa. And she moved kind of quickly, more than she would have normally, trying to put as much distance as possible between her baby and that stranger. Then she really breathed a sigh of relief when Lisa was out of sight. After that, Lisa walked around to the baby department to look around. The Walmart security cameras followed her, and they captured everything she did that day in the store. Lisa selected some baby clothing, paid for them, and left. She turned left out of the parking lot, and at the last light before leaving Maryville, she turned onto the road to Skidmore. Lisa drove down Elm Street to the home of Zeb and Bobbie Jo, and Bobbie Jo was home waiting. She was expecting Darlene Fisher to come and look at puppies, and she was pretty excited about the visit because she loved to show off her puppies.
Oh, yeah. She loves animals. She loves dogs. She wants everybody to share in her passion.
Yeah, I don't know if I could raise them and give them away. I would never breed anyway, but just the idea of having puppies and then have to give them to someone, that would be hard.
Well, it would be.
So there was no physical evidence that Lisa Montgomery used any force to enter the home. There were no forensic indications that anything happened in the bedroom that housed the litter of rat terriers. Bobbie Jo was comfortable enough with her visitor to turn her back on her. So Lisa took that moment to throw a rope around Bobbie Jo's neck. Bobbie Jo resisted, moving Lisa backward. She clawed at the rope around her throat, and Lisa held her in a death grip until Bobbie Jo's thrashing body went limp. So Bobbie Jo slid unconscious to the floor. Lisa took the knife and knelt on the floor by Bobbie Jo. Then she sunk the knife into the top of Bobbie Jo's belly. Bobbie Jo wasn't dead yet, though. She twitched, and the pain of the incision revived her, and she cried out. So this was a horrible way to die. Bobbie Jo knocked away the knife and staggered to her feet, and the struggle left cuts over both of her hands. She was able to grab Lisa's hair, and she pulled some strands out by the roots. But it still wasn't enough to stop Lisa. Lisa squeezed the rope tighter around Bobbie Jo's neck, and when Bobbie Jo's body went limp again, Lisa still held on to make sure Bobbie Jo was dead. So Bobbie Jo was laying there dead, and in her hands she held some clumps of Lisa's hair. Then Lisa kneeled again and finished cutting. When the cut was long enough and deep enough, she saw Bobbie Jo's uterus. And when she cut it open, she did it carefully like she'd learned on the video. She then reached into Bobbie Jo's body and pulled out the live baby girl.
That's one other thing I forgot to say, too.
Yeah?
She just killed the mother, so she's got to get that newborn out of the uterus pretty fast.
Yep.
Like within a minute.
I know.
Otherwise, the baby's not getting any oxygen.
I understand that,
when
yeah.
the mother's dead, so you're under a little bit of a time constraint here.
Well, yeah, and it really is a miracle that that baby was breathing. Because you think that baby may have at least needed some resuscitation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's articles on this, how many times it's unsuccessful. You end up cutting a dead baby out of a dead mother.
Yeah, I've never really heard stories about that happening, but I would think it would happen.
Yeah.
Of course, it's a rare crime anyway.
It is.
Thankfully. So Lisa cut the umbilical cord, and she tied off the end of the cord. Then she wrapped the baby in a blanket, held her tight in her arms, and took her outside. She did grab the knife before rushing to her car, and she drove out of Skidmore heading to Maryville. She took the highway and continued across the Missouri-Kansas state line to Topeka. Then she pulled into the Long John Silver's, and that's when she called her husband Kevin and told him the good news. So the day after, when Lisa and Kevin ran errands and ate breakfast and showed off their new baby, investigators were closing in from that IP address of the false identity Darlene Fisher. They arrived at the modest farmhouse and waited for Lisa and Kevin to return, which they did.
They did. And the man who climbed out of the dirty red car had short brown hair, a mustache, and a darker goatee flecked with gray. The woman had shoulder-length, dirty blonde hair, heavy eyebrows, prominent cheekbones, and a receding chin. She wore oversized glasses and certainly looked skinnier than you'd expect for a new mother. The man, Kevin, went around to the passenger side of the car and opened the door, helping Lisa out of the car. She walked with him into the house, holding a swaddled baby close to her chest. So both of them seemed unaware of the law enforcement presence around their home.
Yeah, they would be because the police were being careful not to...
They didn't want anything to happen to the infant.
Sure.
So as soon as they went inside, one investigator went to the door. Kevin answered and invited them all in. So whatever he was thinking, he was baffled by the police in his home. Lisa held the newborn baby in her arms, and next to her, the notice of the Amber Alert for Bobbie Jo's baby was scrolling across the bottom of the TV screen. That's how appropriate.
I know, right? It's like something you'd see in a film. But Lisa, of course, was asked right away about her baby, and they said, "Is that your baby?" And she said, "Yes, you want to see it?" She stretched out her arms and she handed the baby to the officer, which I think a real mother wouldn't do that, right?
No.
Hand your baby over like that?
Your one-day-old baby?
Yeah, she's a little too cooperative. So on Lisa's empty hands, though, he could see a series of small, fresh cuts on many of her fingers. When questioned, Kevin told him about the call from Lisa in Topeka the afternoon before and his drive to pick her and the baby up and bring them home. Lisa explained her shopping trip to Topeka that had been interrupted when her water broke. And she told the officer about the delivery of her baby the day before and told them it had been at the Birth and Women's Center. So while the couple was talking to Officer Strong and FBI Special Agent Michael Miller, other members of law enforcement were checking out Lisa's story. They quickly learned that no babies were born at the birthing center on December 16th. Since the authorities already had warrants, they were able to walk out of the house with the baby girl. Sheriff Espy received a text then saying, "I have the baby in my hands." And boy, was he relieved.
I'll bet. So the infant was rushed to Stormont Vale Regional Health Center in Topeka for evaluation and DNA testing. Lisa and Kevin continued to be questioned in their home. Lisa sat expressionless as she was advised of her constitutional rights. Then she was confronted with the information the police had learned about no births at the center the day before. And at first, Lisa maintained her original story, and Kevin insisted that this was all a big mistake.
Yeah, but under the persistent questioning, Lisa did finally give up. Her face fell and her shoulders slumped, and she confessed to strangling Bobbie Jo and removing the fetus with a knife. She admitted that Abigail was Bobbie Jo's baby, not hers, and only one person in the room was surprised, and that was Kevin. It just sickened him and confused him, the poor guy. This was not the Lisa he thought he'd married. Most people who knew Lisa found Kevin's ignorance understandable because they also had believed Lisa when she'd insisted on many things. And they believed her when she insisted that Kevin had known nothing about this. Lisa had been lying to people all of her life, and she'd been successful at it many times. I think part of it is she had been caught before, so what did she really have to lose?
Right. Might as well be all in.
Yeah. So it was 3:30, a little over 24 hours after the murder, when the 5-pound, 11-ounce baby girl entered the Stormont Vale Regional Healthcare Center emergency room in Topeka. Personnel transferred her to the neonatal intensive care unit, and doctors said that she was responding normally for a baby who was born 1 month premature. Blood was drawn for DNA testing. They all believed, of course, that it was Bobbie Jo's baby, but they needed to prove it.
And after a couple hours of questioning, Lisa Montgomery was arrested and taken to jail in Kansas City, Kansas. Kevin Montgomery was not charged with a crime. He was brought in for intensive interrogation. Authorities photographed the cuts on Lisa's hands. They scraped beneath her fingernails. Tests of that material showed that it was a genetic mix of the DNA of Bobbie Jo Stinnett and Lisa Montgomery. And after the Montgomerys were removed from their home, a search of the house and vehicles began. In the hundreds of documents, papers, receipts, and other items seized, the forensic technicians found many items of forensic importance. From the trunk of Lisa's car, they removed a cord that was covered with blood and hair. genetic testing would find the DNA of Bobbie Jo Stinnett. A knife that Lisa identified as the one she used to cut open her victim held more evidence. Testing on the blade of the knife showed it was a mixture of DNA of Bobbie Jo and the baby. And on the handle, analysis revealed a blend of the genetic material of 3 individuals, the baby, the mother, and Lisa Montgomery.
So none of that was surprising.
No.
It was about 4 p.m. when Lisa's mother, Judy, received a phone call from her niece in Texas, who said, "Is it true Lisa has a baby?" "Yes," Judy said. "Is it a girl?" "Yes," Judy said. And then she listened as her niece shared what she knew about this tragic story of Bobbie Jo and the baby girl. The news spread through Malvern very quickly, very small town. Whether they knew Lisa or not, it was shocking. Interest in the story became nationwide. Many had never heard of this type of crime. But after the homicide of Lacey Peterson, the public did understand the vulnerability of a pregnant woman to violence committed by a spouse or a boyfriend, and now they knew that a stranger was an additional threat. Although rare, kidnapping by C-section was common enough to have been studied by forensic specialists. So, between 1983 and the year 2000, there were 199 reported cases of infant abduction, and 30 of those involved acts of violence. 6 of these violent kidnappings involved cesarean section, according to an article published in the Journal of Forensic Science. So pretty rare for someone to steal a baby before it's born.
Yeah, so that from 17 years, 83 to 2000. So between 1983 and 2000, there were 199 cases of infant abduction. Now, 30 of those involved violence, and 6 of those violent kidnappings involved C-sections. So this is a pretty tiny piece of the pie.
Well, and it should be.
Well, just the thought of trying to do a C-section on somebody who's either dead or restrained or whatever.
Well, and just the horror and violence, and it's just a horrible thing to do. So I have a couple examples. You want to hear them?
I do.
Okay. So 1987, 19-year-old Darcy Pierce lied to her husband, and she convinced him that she was pregnant. Then she hid surgical instruments and medical books in her home. When her husband left for work one day, she told him she was going to the hospital where she was scheduled to be induced for labor. Then she drove over to the Kirkland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and she parked outside of the prenatal clinic there. But Darcy was not planning to enter the clinic. She didn't have an appointment with a doctor. What she was doing is she was lying in wait, looking for the right pregnant woman to walk out of the building. And she didn't have to wait too long. Her victim was young, just 24 years old. She was obviously close to term, 8 months pregnant. Her name was Cindy Ray. Darcy forced her into her car at gunpoint, and she used her left hand to steer, with her right hand aiming the gun straight at the stomach of the terrified woman. Marcy's plan was to take Cindy back to her house that she shared with her husband. At her own house, she had the equipment and the books she needed to perform a C-section. But Darcy was forced to change her plan. She couldn't go home because when she approached her house, she saw that her husband's car was in the driveway.
Whoops.
Yeah, he wasn't supposed to be home, but he was. So Darcy just drove past her house, and she drove out to an isolated area of the desert in the East Mountains. There, she strangled Cindy until she lost consciousness. She dragged her limp body out of the car, and without the surgical instruments that she'd planned to use, she really had to improvise. So this one is a real horror show. The only sharp objects she could find were her car and house keys that were hanging from a ring, and that was what she used. She had to push down really hard to get the keys to cut through the skin, and even harder to sever the muscles. This was difficult and brutal. I can't even imagine it was possible. So Darcy did manage to cut Cindy open enough to remove a live baby girl. And this is another case where it's amazing the baby was still alive. Darcy abandoned Cindy's bloody body on the side of the road, pretty much just like it was trash. And she had the baby she wanted. That's all she cared about. But she needed to get her hands on a birth certificate so she could prove that this was her child. Darcy drove to a car dealership where a friend worked and told her that she had just had the baby. And this friend took her to a local hospital where Darcy told her husband earlier that day that she was scheduled for a labor induction. But the physician took one look at her and was very skeptical of her story. And she allowed him to do a gynecological exam. I think the doctor and everyone there was pretty insistent that she do that. Once she entered with the baby, she wasn't going to leave.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something just didn't look right, and when the doctor did his exam, his suspicions were confirmed. There was no physical evidence that Darcy had given birth, so he called the police and she was taken into custody. At trial, the defense argued that in addition to borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder, Darcy suffered from atypical dissociative disorder, and that made her incapable of controlling her actions. So she was legally insane at the time she committed the crime. But the prosecution's expert, Dr. Philip Resnick, agreed with the defense on the first two disorders but argued on the third. Rather than suffering from disassociation, he said she had antisocial personality disorder, and that diagnosis was not consistent with an insanity defense. But what the jury did is they just kind of split the difference. They found her guilty but mentally ill. So their decision sent Darcy to prison, where she would stay for at least 30 years. And then after 30 years, she'd be reassessed and maybe given a change in status. I think we talked about this case before years ago when we did a special episode on fetal abductions. Long time ago.
It kind of rings a bell.
I remember the key, which is just horrifying.
And I remembered Albuquerque.
I just think the key, that sounds impossible to even do. And then if she spent all that, it would take a long time. If she'd already killed the woman and then it took her that much time to cut her, you'd think that baby would be dead.
Yeah, you would.
Yeah. Okay, so one more story, and this one is really crazy, and I don't think I've ever heard of this one before. This was in Brownsville, a Texas town on the border with Mexico, and this was an abduction that occurred in 1992, and it was strange enough to be written up in the News of the Weird column in newspapers across the country. Rosa Botello met Laura Lugo, a 27-year-old pregnant woman, at a social gathering in town. Rosa then introduced Laura to her sister, Paulina, who lived in the nearby town of McAllen. Paulina claimed that she too was pregnant, and the two sisters started a friendship with Laura. So Laura was 8.5 months pregnant. She was living from one welfare check to the other when the sisters made her an offer that was just too good to be true. She needed a prenatal checkup, they told her, because she wasn't getting prenatal care. They said, "It'll be our gift to you. We'll pay for it." And they took Laura to an appointment at the Brownsville office of Paulina's obstetrician, and this was Dr. Bierstadt. After he did an exam of Laura, the doctor spoke with the two sisters. Then he asked them all to meet him in his office across the border in Mexico. Laura was pretty confused by this, and she was reluctant to go, but somehow Rosa and Paulina made light of the doctor's instructions and promised they'd all go shopping afterward. It would be fun. And they lured her across the border. In his Mexican examination room, Dr. Bierstadt gave Laura an injection that caused her to lose consciousness. And while she was under, he performed a C-section and gave the baby over to Rosa and Paulina. You believe this? Yeah, it is incredible. When Laura woke up, the nurses told her that her baby was gone, and the Botello sisters were gone too. Laura would battle for 2 years to try and get custody of her child, and it was a difficult fight since Paulina, through bribery or whatever, was able to obtain a birth certificate showing that the baby boy was her biological child and that his father was a Mexican drug lord. But Laura maintained that she had given birth to that baby until the courts decided they would resolve the issue by ordering DNA testing. So that came back. So that was still in process when the Botello sisters changed their story. They claimed that the baby was not the biological child of Paulina, but it was rightfully her baby just the same. They said that Laura approached them because she wanted to get an abortion. But instead of giving her the money for the procedure, they convinced Laura to allow them to pay the medical expenses of carrying the child until birth if she would just give the baby to them after he was born. So they said Laura agreed to that, and she agreed to let Paulina have the baby. But in 1994, DNA testing did prove conclusively that the 2-year-old was Laura's biological child, and the court finally awarded custody to her. And you would hope that's the end and the two sisters go to prison, but it's not.
But it's not?
It's not. The punishment that was actually given to the sisters was very light. Prior to trial, Paulina spent 62 days in a Mexican jail awaiting extradition to the U.S. Aside from that, neither of them had any imprisonment. They both received a sentence of 3 years probation. Laura had this wonderful reunion with her baby, but it only lasted for 11 weeks. Then she disappeared on December 21st, 1994. Her charred skeleton was found, riddled with bullets, 6 months later. In October 1997, an informant told police that a woman named Janet Ramirez was with Laura Lugo when she died. And when Janet was arrested on theft charges in April of 1998, police questioned her about the death of Laura Lugo, and she confessed to being involved in the murder. Janet was the mistress of Randall Ledbetter, a U.S. Border Patrol agent in Arizona, and she saw Laura as her romantic rival for his affections. So Janet Ramirez pled guilty to murder and got a 20-year sentence. She testified at the trial of the former officer of the Border Patrol, and the jury did not find Janet's testimony credible, so the officer was acquitted. But this poor woman, she's pregnant on her own, living off state assistance.
Yeah.
She meets these two women who she finally thinks she has friends that want to help her. They take the baby. She goes through all that to get her baby back, and then she gets murdered.
2 years she works to get her baby back.
Yep.
And has her back for
Less
11
than a year.
weeks.
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah, it's really horrific. I think that's the craziest story I've ever heard.
That is. That's one of those things you say it's too weird to be true.
Yep.
So Zeb Stinnett saw his newborn daughter for the first time on that Friday evening at the hospital. He gave her the name he and Bobbie Jo had agreed upon, Victoria Jo Stinnett. Medical personnel checked the health of the baby in the neonatal intensive care unit. Zeb took his baby girl home on Monday, December 20th, but he didn't return to Skidmore and his home on Elm Street. He moved in with his mother in the nearby town of Maitland. Zeb took a 12-week paternity leave to adjust to his new role as single father and to grieve for his wife.
Yeah, for 2 days straight, the FBI questioned Kevin. They tried to break down his story and catch him in a contradiction. But finally, they were convinced that Kevin really was as clueless as he claimed to be.
Do not see how that happens.
I know, but you're a doctor, so you have knowledge. But I would think anybody would know enough to question it, especially if you're sleeping with her and
Yeah, maybe they have
her.
separate bedrooms, but still.
But he thought that he had felt the baby move. So I guess it's just a matter you can convince people of anything. So Lisa was charged with kidnapping resulting in death, and the indictment alleged that she willfully kidnapped, abducted, and carried away Victoria Jo for the purpose of claiming the infant as her own. She'd also taken Victoria Jo across the state lines, and her actions, of course, had resulted in the death of Bobbie Jo. Aggravating factors included that Lisa had killed Bobbie Jo in an especially heinous, cruel, and depraved manner. So the government filed an intent to seek the death penalty in this case. But Lisa's defense argued against the death penalty. They said that they were going to use the insanity defense. And then she underwent many mental health evaluations. It did come out that Lisa Montgomery had a very nightmarish childhood that led to her committing crimes. And family members and authorities did know of her suffering as a child, but didn't do anything to help her. So first of all, Lisa had been born to a family with a history of mental illness, including schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and depression. Lisa's father left the family when she was very young, and her family moved about once a year. Lisa's mother, Judy, abused her in very extreme and sadistic ways. And this is according to interviews with nearly 450 family members, neighbors, lawyers, social workers, and teachers. So Lisa, as a baby, was forced to sit in a high chair for hours if she didn't finish her food. Her mouth would be covered with duct tape so frequently that she learned never to cry. And according to her mother, her first words were, "Please don't spank me, it hurts." So it's hard to believe that anyone treats a child this way. But Lisa's mother just seemed to have no conscience or anything about it. Her older half-sister said that their mother hit them with brooms and belts. She forced the sister Diane to eat raw onions until she cried, and once stripped her naked and put her out of the house in freezing temperatures, telling her never to come back. She made nightly trips to a bar, leaving the girls with so-called babysitters, who sometimes raped Diane. At the age of 8, Lisa lost her only protector when Diane was removed from the home and placed in foster care, and she was fortunate enough to end up with a loving family.
Why wasn't Lisa placed in foster care?
That's the question here. Diane reported that she vomited all the way to the foster home, knowing the fate of her then 4-year-old sister, Lisa. Lisa's stepfather, Jack Kleiner, was an alcoholic, and he began to assault her sexually when she was about 13. He actually built a shed-like room next to the family's trailer in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and kept Lisa there. Then he would bring friends over to rape her, often for hours, sometimes 3 men at once. So, as if that wasn't enough, Lisa's mother began to prostitute her to make money to pay bills. And this isn't something Lisa made up. There are many witnesses who were aware of this. So by the age of 23, Lisa had 4 young children, and it's no surprise that she abused and neglected them. She suffered from episodes of mania and psychosis, and according to her defenders, Lisa likely suffered from fetal alcohol syndrome. By the time she was arrested for her crime, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, temporal lobe epilepsy, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociative disorder, psychosis, and traumatic brain injury. So scans of her brain showed damage and abnormal patterns in the areas responsible for regulating social and emotional behavior and memory, and those can all be affected by trauma. So her adverse childhood experiences had a score of 9 out of 10, and her global functioning score showed severe impairment in daily activities. But maybe the most shocking information here is that there were all these people who knew of her abuse and did nothing to help her. Her sister was sent to foster care due to abuse or neglect, but Lisa got no help. In the child welfare system, Lisa's life should have been investigated as well. Her sister said she was afraid to tell the foster parents. She didn't want them to know about her history of being raped because she felt guilty about it, and she would regret the decision not to tell them for the rest of her life.
Oh, she's probably also afraid of being taken out of this foster home.
Well, of course.
Where she's doing very well.
Yeah, she was lucky to have made it there.
She was.
As a student in elementary school, Lisa was placed in special needs classes, and an administrator thought this academic deterioration of hers might be due to deep emotional trauma, but the school took no action to uncover or report any cause. As a teenager, Lisa told her cousin, a deputy sheriff in Kansas, about being raped by Kleiner and his friends, and he told investigators that he knew she was telling the truth, and he regrets taking no action, but really gave no explanation for why he didn't take any action. So you would think Lisa's life might have got better when she divorced Jack Kleiner, but that's not true. She forced Lisa to testify about the rapes during the divorce proceedings, and her mother sat unmoved during Lisa's testimony. There was a social worker who found Lisa's claims believable and turned over the file to the Tulsa County DA's office, but no action was taken there either. So the government's expert, Dr. Dietz, testified that there are 2 different phenomena that have been called pseudocyesis or false pregnancy. The first is when a woman believes she is pregnant but is not mentally ill and has no other delusions. Her belief usually ends when she's confronted with evidence that she's not pregnant. The second does involve mental illness, usually schizophrenia, and the delusion of pregnancy. The delusion is firmly held as a conviction, and these patients continue to believe that they are pregnant, even after being confronted with proof that they're not. So his opinion was that Lisa did not have pseudocyesis at the time of her offense, and that's because she did not have a sincere belief that she was pregnant. So when asked what evidence indicated that she did not really believe she was pregnant, he said that she was aware that she'd had a tubal ligation, despite telling others that she'd had it reversed. And with previous pregnancies, she'd gotten prenatal care and brought her husband to the appointments. But with her alleged pregnancy, she didn't seek out any prenatal care and didn't take a pregnancy test. So in other words, she told people she was pregnant while knowing that she wasn't. So his conclusion was that with reasonable medical certainty, Lisa did not suffer from any mental disease or defect that affected her ability to appreciate the nature and the quality of wrongfulness of her acts. Which is kind of hard to believe, because if you're raised in that environment, how do you really know right from wrong? Normally it's your parents who teach you that.
That's a seriously messed up person.
Yeah.
So the jury found her guilty of kidnapping resulting in death, and the case moved on to the penalty stage. Over 2 days, the jury heard from her friends, family, co-workers, and psychologists. The mitigating factors that were presented for a sentence of life in prison were her capacity to appreciate that what she did was wrong was impaired. She committed the crime under severe mental and emotional disturbance, and that she had been a nurturing mother to her children. Various witnesses had testified that she was a good mother.
Well, the jury came back with a death penalty verdict, and they unanimously found that the government had proved beyond a reasonable doubt all of their aggravating factors. So Lisa Montgomery was eventually executed by lethal injection on January 13th of 2021. So not that long ago. When asked if she had any last words, she simply said no. So she was the first female federal prisoner executed in 67 years. She was the first woman executed in the United States since Kelly Gissendaner in 2015, and the first person executed in the United States in 2021. It's funny to think, but in her final days, she kept a calendar, and it was marked with Joe Biden's inauguration date, because Biden had promised to enact a moratorium on capital punishment at the federal level. And he did go through with it. He did enact the moratorium on July 1st, 2021, but it was too late for Lisa. In 2023, one of her attorneys admitted that her legal team had briefly considered taking her off the medications she was on to stabilize her mental health, and the intent was for her to go absolutely psychotic, and this would be in her team's effort to postpone her execution by proving mental fragility exacerbated by sexual abuse from childhood. But the attorney said, ultimately, we just couldn't do that to her. So it's all round a sad case.
It is.
You can't help but have sympathy for Lisa's childhood. And you can kind of look at and think, she was created. This monster she became was created by these people who raised her or failed to raise her.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they raised her.
No. So the baby, Victoria Jo, grew up and seemed to be healthy and happy. Their dad and a stepmom, so there was a decent outcome for the baby anyway.
Well, she got returned quickly.
Yes. So we're going to be moving on if you don't have anything else to say on this.
I don't.
Okay. We're going to address some of the feedback. But first, do any of you have a need for more true crime brewery in your life and no patience for ads? This is a problem that is easily solved. Just go to tiegrabber.com/subscribe and sign up. Subscribing gives you all episodes, old and new, without ads. It gives you bonus episodes, and of course, those are ad-free too. You can get all the same benefits too if you go to patreon.com/tiegrabber.
It's time for listener feedback.
So what have we got for voicemail?
We have a voicemail from Nate, one of our longtime listeners. Haven't heard from him lately. It's always good to hear how he's doing. And he has some cases he wants us to consider.
Hi, Dick and Jill. It's Nate. I was wondering how you guys are doing. I know it's hot all year round in New Mexico, but we just started summer up here in Massachusetts. I think we had our first 90-degree day today. Anyway, I actually had a couple of case suggestions for you. I don't know if you guys cover international acts of terrorism, but Korean Airlines Flight 858 in 1987 was bombed at the orders of Kim Jong-il to try to scare countries away from the 1988 Olympics. It failed spectacularly. I mean, they did bomb the airline. It was lost with everyone on board. But it failed spectacularly in the aim of scaring people away from the Olympics. The surviving North Korean agent, one of them took their own life, and the other, a lady, Kim Hyun-hui, she ended up being sentenced to death, but was pardoned by the South Korean government and lives free in South Korea to this day. I just thought it's an interesting case. There's a book on the case called Tears of My Soul. Another one is the 1999 Russian apartment bombings, which is one of the things that led to Vladimir Putin being in power. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that the Russian Secret Service, the FSB, which is the successor to the KGB, actually planted the bombs as a false flag operation to raise Putin's popularity and public profile prior to Yeltsin picking him as a successor. The other terrorist attack is there's evidence that the attack on Salman Rushdie was actually organized by Iran and by Hezbollah. And I was wondering if you maybe wanted to talk about Salman Rushdie and the multiple threats against his life over the years, over the Satanic Verses book that he had to live in hiding for years. And then, is it 3 years ago, someone almost killed him, very close to killing him. Anyway, I was just wondering if you wanted to consider those to cover. I hope you guys are doing well. I hope the heat's not too bad. And it was great seeing you guys on TV, and hopefully, you're on TV more often. Anyway, I hope you guys have a good summer. And anyway, cheers.
Well, thank you, Nate. I'm going to say these cases are a little out of our wheelhouse, but as far as me being curious, I'd love to read more about them.
Sure.
And never say never, right?
Never say never, but I'm with Jill. We've got all these innocent people that are killed by the request of a dictator.
Well, I would just say it's a little above my head as far as this is like serious political stuff.
Right.
I'm more of a domestic crime
That's a good way of putting
person.
it.
But it is interesting, and we always appreciate your input, Nate, for sure. I think we'll definitely be talking about Karen Reed in a while because Nate knows a lot about that.
Yeah, he lives up there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. As far as being on TV, I don't know. We enjoyed it, but I don't know if it's something I'd want to do again.
Well, let's just say nobody's beating down our door to get us signed up.
That's true, too. But it was a lot of fun.
It was.
Absolutely. Okay, next we have an email from James Ellison. He wants an episode on Noah Pressgrove. So in September of 2023, he was halfway through a 4-day birthday party when he went missing. After trying to bed the birthday girl, Noah went for a walk. A few hours later, his body was found by the side of the road about a mile away from the party, naked and wearing 2 mismatched shoes. He had extensive head and upper body injuries and died from internal bleeding. To this date, Noah's death remains unsolved. Now that sounds pretty fascinating and maybe simple and domestic enough for my brain.
I think we'd be able to do that. It's just there's
This
a
is a
lot
mystery.
of stuff. Yeah, I mean, my thinking as I was reading through a couple of things I found on Noah was that he probably got involved in a hit-and-run accident. He was pretty drunk at this party, and after being turned down by the birthday girl, he walked away, maybe to clear his head or something, and he was found about a mile away. So I thought that initially, but then there's some other things that sound weird.
Yeah, it's a real mystery. So
it is.
let's look into it and see some more about it.
We ought to check that out.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, James. 2 guys, that's unusual. Usually our following is mostly women, so it's refreshing to get.
I have a couple letters from women.
So here's an email from Virginia Teresa. Love listening to your podcast. I was looking for 3 murders in your collection but could not find them and would like to hear you discuss both of them. These are Todd Mullis, the corn rake killer, Matthew Moore, a staged suicide murder, and Alec Murdaugh murders. Of course, everyone knows the Murdaugh murders, and that is something that we're planning to do. There's just so much to it, I have to find the time to research it so I'll know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I wasn't going to even include him in the story because, like you said, it's a very well-known, pretty recent one. We are planning on doing that. But the others were interesting.
So what's this Todd Mullis? I've heard of that. He killed his wife with a corn rake. So she had an affair and was considering divorce. He's appealed the decision, and this is ringing bells, so I'm going to look into that. I think I did read about that before.
Well, supposedly he had an alibi in his son. His teenage son was helping him work that day, actually all 3 of them. And the mother was going to do something. And it went a period of time, the father and son working together, didn't hear anything from mom. So they looked around and found her lying face down with a corn rake in her back.
In her back. So was he trying to claim that was an accident?
Yeah, that she had fallen backwards.
I don't think you could do it with enough force to kill yourself unless it was like in your upper neck or...
Well, it was
Your back's pretty strong, a lot of muscle.
Yeah, but this corn rake is pretty long tines, sharp.
Well, maybe I'm not thinking of what a corn rake is. Is that the thing that the guy holds in American
Gothic?
Yes. It's like a big rake he holds. When you said corn rake, I was thinking more of like the rake we use.
No, a leaf rake.
The leaf rake. No, the leaf rakes are the big loose ones. I'm talking about the metal one that you use to move the rocks around.
Yeah, it's like a hoe.
Not a hoe.
Well,
a hoe doesn't have prongs.
It's got several prongs.
Yeah. Anyway, I didn't know a corn rake has very long tongs, like a fork almost.
One of the things that was interesting is that a corn rake has 4 tines.
Okay.
And the dead lady had 6 wounds in her body.
So maybe boom and then pulled it out and then boom again?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they decided it was a murder, so.
Yeah.
It's only 2019. Maybe I can find the trial. If he must have gone to trial if he says he's not guilty.
Yeah, he was found guilty.
Well, let's look for the trial. That could be interesting. And then Matthew Moore, I'd never heard of this one. He was charged with murdering his wife, Emily Noble, in May of 2020. He said her death was a suicide, and he was acquitted.
Well, she had hung herself and had a history with a prior attempt. Brother or someone in her family had killed themselves by hanging. So there was a history there. And I think at least initially her death was felt to be a suicide. But then there were some broken bones.
Some suspicious things.
So he was charged, but was found to be not guilty.
One more email from Mary Ellen Schmidt. I just watched the latest episode of 2020 on ABC Hulu about the murder of Krista and Bart Halderson. You both had a lot of good information on the case to share. One question that wasn't addressed on the program was, what happened to the other son, Mitchell? He wasn't involved in the search or investigation and never mentioned since the beginning. Would love to hear if you have any information. Well, thank you, Mary Ellen. One thing is, whenever I watch these shows, I think they're lacking in information, but I think that's how they're entertaining. Because I get really down in the details. Sometimes I get a little too deep in the details. I know when we filmed it, they kind of had to keep me from digging in too much. They didn't have all night, right?
They wanted shorter answers or shorter responses than you were wanting to give.
Well, and I understand that because they're trying to make an entertaining 2-hour show with like however many commercials they have nowadays, at least a half an hour, it seems like.
Well, but it's interesting because there wasn't anything written about the surviving son.
Not really. You mean talked about?
Talked about.
Not really. There were other things, though, that I said, why didn't they mention that? Like the pool thing. But
he was in college. He was pursuing a degree in IT.
And then he had a fiancé.
He was engaged.
Yeah. In the trial, they kind of just presented him as the functional son.
Yeah.
That was doing adulting and that Chandler was not.
Yeah. But there wasn't really anything that spoke about Mitchell after the fact.
Not really. And I guess he didn't want to do any interviews because I'm sure they would have interviewed him if he wanted to be involved.
Oh, yeah.
They really only had the one cousin as a family spokesperson and then some neighbors and things.
Yep.
So Mitchell graduated from college. He did get a job in the IT field. He did marry his fiancée, but sadly they divorced 4 months or so later.
Not very
long
marriage.
after. Which is weird because they were together a long time. And then they got married and it didn't last. I'm always just confused when that happens. People will be in a long-term relationship and then they'll get married and then it won't last at all.
So it's not real long-term?
No, but how can you be together that long and then you get married and all of a sudden it's over?
Well, Mitchell had some trauma.
Well, yeah. I'm not saying anything against him. I mean, it's understandable. He lost his whole family in like one of the worst ways you possibly could.
Sure did.
So, yeah, I wouldn't hold anything against him. Yeah, that's a young man who's really suffered. And I don't believe he's in communication with Chandler, last I heard. Chandler's never admitted to anything or shown any remorse.
He did move from Wisconsin. Mitchell did.
Oh, where'd he move to?
Chicago area. A lot more anonymity in Chicago than in Wisconsin, where he used to live.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a big change, though, from living in the suburbs of Wisconsin to living in Chicago.
Very definitely.
Yeah. Well, I hope he's successful and things go well for him. It makes me sad that he got divorced, but...
Somebody wrote that he enjoyed cooking.
Okay.
So.
You enjoy cooking?
Yeah.
Well, I hope that Mitchell finds happiness. He deserves it for sure. Nobody should have to go through something like that.
Had a lot of trauma.
A lot of trauma. Seems like he had a great childhood with 2 parents who loved him from what we can tell. So it's just really sad that he lost them.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up. We've hit that 2-hour mark. Things to do, dogs to feed, all that jazz. So we will talk to everybody soon.
You bet.
All right. See you next time at the Quiet End.
Come on down.
Oh, wait, there was one more thing I wanted to say.
Wait a minute, I'm out.
So on Patreon, I got a message from Jane S. And I feel like an idiot because she clarified the whole jail-prison thing. Remember, you said, oh, they're like the same. And I said, well, I think when you're in jail, you're not convicted yet. When you're in prison, you're convicted, which is kind of true. But Jane said, technically, jail is where people convicted of misdemeanors are incarcerated, and prison is where people convicted of felonies are incarcerated. I guess you're in jail if you're awaiting trial or if you've just been convicted of a misdemeanor. She said, somewhat circular, the thing that distinguishes misdemeanors from felonies is that misdemeanor punishments comprise incarceration of a year or less, and felonies are subject to incarceration of more than a year. So I just wanted to thank Jane and say, duh, we're so stupid. We should have known that. Well, I think at some point I did know it, so I don't know. Sometimes you just get talking and you're an idiot. It happens to the best of us, I guess, and the worst of us. Anyway, we'll see you next time. Thanks, Jane, at the Quiet End.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.